I'm very pleased, ladies and gentlemen, to invite a very unique woman, Raheel Raza, to the stage to share with us a bit of her personal story. From childhood in Pakistan through the rise of radical Islam, there to establishment of her organization and her global efforts to counter radical Islam and her friendship with the Jewish people. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Raheel Raza.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored and delighted to be here for many reasons, not the least of which is the fact that when I was leaving Toronto, it was -18 and snowing. Although this is my 11th visit to the State of Israel, every time I visit, some well-meaning people who are clueless about this country try to warn me with preconceived notions and a know-it-all attitude. To top it off, my husband, who has accompanied me on this visit, comments that visiting Israel is like visiting his in-laws. To address both these points, what happened to me yesterday when I arrived at Tel Aviv airport sort of sealed the deal. The immigration officer asked me, "Where's your Israeli passport?" And then seeing the look on my face, he said, "You don't have your Israeli passport yet?" What can I say? I hope that someone is taking note of this. So to the naysayers who warned me about Israel, there's no other place where I'm received with so much warmth. To my husband, I say this is family, so he may as well get used to it. And for me, it is like coming home. My friends, I'm a Pakistani by birth, a Canadian by choice, and Islam is my spiritual faith. The Pakistan that I grew up in was very different from what we see today. It was diverse, it was pluralistic, people were tolerant of other faith traditions, which existed side by side with us. There were Christians, Zoroastrians, and Hindus, and I actually did my schooling and college in a Catholic convent. It might also fascinate you to know that at the beginning of the 20th century, the largest city of Pakistan, Karachi, had 2,500 Jews engaged as tradesmen, artisans, and civil servants. In 1893, the Jews of Karachi built the Magan Shalom synagogue, and in 1936, Abraham Rubin became the first Jewish counselor on the city corporation. However, today in Pakistan, there is blatant anti-Semitism and a strong anti-Israel sentiment, which is entirely political in nature and isn't based on moral considerations, but on ignorance. Pakistan has a population of approximately 182 million and growing, and so is the anti-Semitism. It was in the late 1970s, under the influence of then-President Zia-ul Haq, that a strong wave of Islamist extremism engulfed Pakistan, and along with it, of course, anti-Semitism. Although I personally grew up in a patriarchal culture where women were supposed to be seen and not heard, I rebelled against the status quo. I insisted on equal participation, and I played hockey with my brothers until I broke my Semitic nose, which has never been the same ever since. My father was a doctor in the armed forces. And the reason I mention my father is because while the women were pushing me to learn cooking and sewing, my father encouraged me in sports, reading, writing, debating, and speaking out, which I continue to do till today. Whatever little I learned about the Jewish people was by reading books from the public library like Exodus by Leon Uris and The Diary of Anne Frank. So I have to admit that I was always fascinated by this community that I did not know. I grew up in a conservative Sunni family, and in 1978 I decided to fall in love and marry a young man who belonged to a Shia conservative family, with his consent, of course. The result was that we had to leave Pakistan. Our first decade was spent in the lucrative Persian Gulf. Then, for the future of our two sons, who, by the way, are half Sunni and half Shia, and therefore are called Sushis, so for the betterment of their future, we decided to migrate to Canada. Our landing in Canada coincided with the global Islamist movement, which was also encroaching in North America. We saw the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood, Khomeiniism, and Wahhabism, and we saw the push for unreasonable accommodation. Then 9/11 happened, and I found myself speaking at churches, synagogues, and temples. But that was not enough. So we set up and launched the Council for Muslims Facing Tomorrow, which is a not-for-profit think tank. I have to share with you, though, that for the first 5 years to Israel, I was invited to the annual conference that was hosted by Shimon Peres, the late Shimon Peres, called Facing Tomorrow. And I was so enthused by both the conference and the name, the title, that I asked permission to name my organization Muslims Facing Tomorrow, as opposed to facing the 7th century and backwards. Part of our mission and vision at Muslims Facing Tomorrow is to advance individual rights and freedoms, to defend freedom of speech as the basis of all other freedoms, to promote that there is no compulsion in religion. Now, Muslims Facing Tomorrow is dedicated to nurturing harmonious coexistence among people of all faiths and to support open and free intellectual discourse about our history, about our own history, beset with problems that need to be publicly discussed. Now, we have a litmus test. When other Muslims want to join our movement for reform, they have to accept unequivocally, 1, gender equality, 2, separation of mosque and state, and 3, the right of Israel to exist as a nation state. I'm proud to tell you that on our board of directors, we have Professor Salim Mansour, a prolific author who has just published a book. It's called The Quran Problem and Islamism. It's on Amazon, and it is definitely worth a read. Our second member of our board of directors is a gentleman from Bangladesh named Hassan Mahmood, who has just published a book called How Shariaism Hijacked Islam. So you can appreciate and understand that we are outside the box, and we certainly push the envelope as far as Islamism is concerned. We have a project in Bangladesh where on a very small amount of money, like $50 a month, we have managed to de-radicalize 25 villages. And by de-radicalize, I mean that in some cases, the women have thrown out the imam of the village and said that what you are teaching us is rubbish. And this is done in villages that are entirely illiterate and cannot read or write. So it is done by showing them documentaries that are in the Bangladeshi language. These are made by our board member, Mr. Hassan Mahmood. And we have targeted 85 more villages to do exactly the same. If this project as a pilot project can work in Bangladesh, we feel it can work in many other third world countries. As part of Muslims Facing Tomorrow, I have been invited to address the UK government, both the House of Commons and the House of Lords. I have been invited to give advice to the Swedish Parliament. I have spoken at the US Congress last July on the Committee on Homegrown Terrorism by giving them some ideas and some bullet points on what they can do. And of course, we continuously are invited to give testimony in the Canadian Parliament on various issues dealing with counterterrorism. At Muslims Facing Tomorrow, and as part of our mandate, we strongly condemn and speak out against extremism and radicalization. Since there is a direct correlation between Islamist extremism and anti-Semitism, the result is that in many Muslim-majority countries, every person in the village who cannot even begin to tell you where Israel is on the map is taught to hate Jews. They do not know who the Jews are, but they are taught hate. And this hate is spouted from the pulpits of some mosques and incorporated into the school curriculums. More worrying than this are the conspiracy theories that abound, where everything from a rainstorm to a delayed train are blamed on a Zionist conspiracy. I am shocked and horrified to see the anti-Semitism that is taking place in educational institutions across North America and on the streets of Toronto in the form of the BDS movement and Israel Apartheid Week. In many cases, these projects are spearheaded by the Muslim Students Association. And it's very unfortunate that the heads of these educational institutions actually allow this to happen. But of course, we are talking about freedoms. And you have to know that the Islamists, the political Islamists, use the very same freedoms that we enjoy in the West to push their own agendas. The last time I was at a university campus and I saw a table talking about anti-Israel Apartheid Week, I went up to them and I said, I can appreciate that you have the freedom to do this, but where is the Iran Apartheid Week and the Saudi Arabia Apartheid Week and the Pakistan Apartheid Week? Because these are the countries where there is real gender apartheid. And they had no response to that. They just looked the other way and tried to ignore me. In Toronto, I have witnessed Al-Quds Day, which is celebrated with gusto every year on the lawns of our legislature, and it's nothing but a hate fest. Ironically, the participants of this hate fest are mostly of Pakistani origin, and one would want to ask them why they are not demonstrating against persecution of minorities in their own lands. As you all are experts and you have been in this field for such a long time, you obviously know that one of the symptoms of this anti-Semitism virus is the BDS movement, which is based on one idea that there are gross human rights violations in Israel. All the anti-Israel movements are supported by this idea that there are human rights violations. So let's accept for a moment that they are right. But what about other Muslim countries? The majority of them have abysmal human rights records. And I know this for a fact because I am accredited with the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva. For the last 5 years, I have gone there twice a year, and I am appalled at the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the OIC, which is a group of 57 Arab Muslim countries whose only reason to exist at the United Nations is to be a thorn in the side of Israel and to blame everything that happens on Israel. Even if there is a conversation or a panel discussion about the persecution of Christian minorities in Pakistan, they bring in the Middle East crisis. So the focus of the OIC is on an anti-Israel agenda, and that agenda is supported, unfortunately, by many other countries and the United Nations as a whole. What I find very unjust and ironic is that the BDSers never speak about the fact that after the 1947 partition of India, approximately 7 million Muslims fled or were forced from their homes in India. They did not return back to India and build new lives in Pakistan. The BDSers never address the fact, I don't even know if they're aware, that during the 9-month-long Bangladesh War for Independence, members of the Pakistani military and supporting Islamist militias from the Jamaat-e-Islami killed up to 3 million people and raped between 200,000 and 400,000 Bangladeshi women. And this is according to a United Nations report and to reports from Bangladesh and India. And this was called a systematic campaign of genocidal rape. This does not even include what Saddam Hussein did to the Shias and the Kurds, plus the genocide of the Armenians, and what ISIS has done with the Yazidis, and what they continue to do in areas of the Middle East. My point is that the rise of BDS as related to the rise of anti-Semitism is directly related to the abysmal failure of Muslim states, and it's a well-funded, well-oiled propaganda machine. I want to take a moment to explore the question of whether there are Islamic theological roots to anti-Semitism, because this is a question that comes up very frequently. Now, the main point on Muslim and Arab anti-Semitism is that there is no basis whatsoever, nor can there be, for Muslims to draw upon the Quran to stigmatize the Jews. The Quran, as revelation, cannot by definition contradict its own universal message of worship of one God, the God of Abraham, of Ishmael and Isaac, of Jacob and Joseph, of Moses, of David and Solomon, and of Jesus. Indeed, the Quran affirms the history of the Jews as the original people of the book, Ahl al-Kitab, and through the history of the Jews, Muhammad is instructed to teach the pagan Arabs to worship the God of Abraham. It might also interest you to know that the Quran also legitimizes this land of Israel as belonging to the Jews. Furthermore, Muslims, when they pray 5 times a day, bestow blessings upon Abraham and his progeny, which is the Jews and Christians. So since Muslims can't draw upon the Quran for their Judeophobia, they turn to the Hadith, or secondary literature on the Prophet's life, through which to stain the universal message of the Quran. But we know that Hadith literature was largely fabricated to provide justification to the Arab rulers who took power in the post-prophetic period, and they cannot be trusted as being objectively true. In modern times, Muslims have abused the Quran by using the Quran to justify their own miserable politics, whether it is the Arabs against the Jews, or the Muslim army of Pakistan waging a genocidal war against Muslims of East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, or the Muslim Arab army of Saddam Hussein massacring the Kurdish and Shia Muslims, and such examples are innumerable, including what we are witnessing now. Now, for me, it's not possible to talk about problems without speaking of solutions. And the solution to the problems have to emanate from within the Muslim communities, where education of children must be tracked and monitored so that hate is not being taught. No one is born a radical or a terrorist. They are taught how to hate. And that is what we as Muslims have to face. This is a war of ideas. And we have to be the frontline warriors in this war of ideas. We can't let political correctness stop us from discussing these important issues, and we at Muslims Facing Tomorrow make it a point to expose these injustices, because we have a mandate of the 3 E's. The first E is to expose the problem, which we do through panels, seminars, through writings, through essays, and through a lot of media exposure. The second E is to educate the masses, which we also do through our board of directors, through our panels. And the third E is to empower non-Muslim communities to work with us, to support us, so that in partnership we can fight all the evils that we see around us. What I say and what I believe, to me, is the truth, and it is consistent no matter where I stand, no matter where I speak, and no matter who the audience is. Because I strongly believe in Edmund Burke saying that the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. What I've experienced myself and what I've witnessed is that the behavior of the BDS movement can be summed up in just one word: hypocrisy. Thank you very much.